Okay, take three after a stupid technical difficulty moment. So, anyway, welcome to Critical Weight Theory. I just got back from an inadvertent nap, and now I'm going to be talking about Mark Twain. So, as Mark Twain might put it, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it may be time to stop and reflect. So, on that note, I actually think that's one of his greatest quotes. And we're going to be talking about some great Mark Twain quotes and how he used humor as critique, and also how he was a controversial figure and held views that would still be controversial today in some circles for sure. So, based on his quote, we could ask in a given situation, are we conforming to norms because they're effective or simply because they're entrenched? And when I say effective, doesn't mean they're good, or does it just mean that we're convinced that they're good? See, there can be a difference in a way. You know what I'm saying? So yes, we're looking at Mark Twain using humor as critique. Twain, often dubbed the father of American literature, was a master at wielding humor to critique social norms, institutions, and humanity itself. However, not all his words land comfortably in modern times, just as they didn't all fit in perfectly with his era. He was at times a controversial figure. His biting commentary on religion, patriotism, and human nature sparks as much discomfort as it does reflection. So, take his famous critique of religion. Well, he made many critiques actually, but he once said, "Faith is believing what you know ain't so." Or his sharp observation on organized religion, kind of a similar issue. And he said, if Christ were here now, there's one thing he would not be: a Christian. Ooh, kind of a sting, right? Like a scorpion tail. Or how about this one? Quote, there is one notable thing about our Christianity: bad, bloody, merciless, money grabbing, and predatory. Ours is a terrible religion. Oof. It hurts so good, doesn't it? Yikes. I think that would land him in hot water if he was a comedian on a stage today. And certainly back then, it was really no different. Yet he still obviously managed to find plenty of fame. And he was definitely somebody who became elevated as one of the people who represented America, at least a certain aspect of America. So statements like those that he made, they challenged the foundation of belief systems and their hypocrisies. While celebrated for their wit, they often alienated devout audiences. And yet, Twain wasn't a nihilist, at least as far as I know. His critiques often aimed at uncovering deeper truths rather than merely tearing down institutions. So he wasn't necessarily against every institution. In fact, few people are genuinely against everything, or however you want to put it. But he recognized that the nature of intelligence is sometimes going to put you at odds with the world around you, because intelligent people will often critique things. They find the flaws, and part of what makes humor work is that sometimes it really does sort of tear down institutions, and it doesn't let anybody off the hook. So on patriotism, Mark Twain wrote, patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. So yeah, that is a fairly common sentiment throughout American history. You'll hear people left, right, and center say things similar to that. But it's also been sort of a controversial statement, too. A nuanced take that underscores the importance of holding power accountable, a sentiment that feels particularly resonant in today's polarized political climate. So, of course, there are other topics associated with Mark Twain. The whole issue of race and the weight of words. Twain's literary legacy also intersects with the complexities of race and representation. And the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Twain exposed the absurdities and cruelties of racism. However, as a lot of people are quick to point out, his use of racial slurs and stereotypes, which were common in his time, continues to stir debate. And it's one of those things that's changed over time. Of course, back at a certain point in history, he was seen in a different light. Now now people are a little bit more focused on certain words that he used, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this if you're familiar with the work of Mark Twain. Was he critiquing society or reflecting its prejudices? Probably both in some capacity, though I am still quicker to consider him more on the right side of history overall. And I'm far from alone in that. I think very few people out there would just see Mark Twain as somebody that needs to be torn down or anything like that. But of course, there are some people who view him that way. So, I somewhat ironically, given that sort of attitude against him, Mark Twain once remarked, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow mindedness." So, in many ways, of course, Mark Twain saw himself as somebody who was not narrow minded. But nowadays, because he said certain things, of course, some people are gonna extrapolate from that he represented nothing but a backward society, which really was not his intention, and certainly not the point of his uh, novels that dealt with the issues of racism and slavery. Um, but the ethos of uh, combating prejudice, bigotry, and narrow mindedness runs through much of his work, even if it's occasionally obscured by the language of his era. Twain's portrayal of, you know, let's just say marginalized groups was often sympathetic, but not without flaws. But of course, those flaws were more rooted in the language of his time, which in some ways he parodied. And it's proof that even the sharpest satirists of that era are products of their time. And it's safe to say that so are modern people who engage in humor. They're in the eyes of some people, they're all going to fall short, and that includes people in the past who used things like ironic racism, or ironic sexism, or ironic homophobia, or whatever. I think a lot of people don't recognize that back in the past, ironic humor was, you know, not only more normal, but some people considered it necessary. Fewer people consider it necessary today, but as somebody who was alive in that era, I can tell you that some people absolutely saw some merit in that. They saw the need to employ certain offensive words in in order to have that shock factor that makes people realize, or that they thought would make people realize, that these words still carry a meaning today. You know what I mean? And I I I, I think it's still debatable how effective that could be, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, practically any issue that you want to examine, I think that there are different ways of looking at it. You know, different layers. It's kind of like how Shrek described it. You know, he's somebody, a character who called himself an onion. Well, you know, reality is kind of like that. It has layers. You know, there are layers of offensive realities, and you can even see some positives in offensive things. You know what I'm saying? So back in that time, especially back in, you know, Mark Twain's era, he was seen as way more of a progressive figure, and certainly some of his quotes, even though I don't think everyone would ever understand everything he ever said, but I think most of what he said still resonates with people today. I think most people understand what he was going for and why he was going for it. And frankly, I think if a lot of people don't understand what he means, they need to, you know, look into it more and better contextualize what he was both experiencing during the time that he was alive and what he was advocating for as an alternative to it. You know, those are all things that shaped his writing. You know, so we can also look at it um, in the modern era and think about humor, irony, and social media. You know, in the digital age, you can examine how humor, irony, and wit operate in online discourse. In various cases, humor can both mitigate and amplify harm, depending on how it's employed and how it's interpreted as well. So, one sort of banal statement that a person could make could be sort of deeply, you know, interpreted, or maybe even misinterpreted, if that's how you want to look at it. You know, I've been there myself. I think we've all had people not really understand what we were trying to say. And you know, sometimes we do say the wrong things, or we don't say them perfectly, or sometimes we might even say the exact opposite of what we meant to say. That's a strange phenomenon that actually does happen. Maybe sometimes we were just in a certain mood at the time, or you know, we had an entirely different belief system. That actually happens. I've definitely met people who have totally changed their beliefs around from their previous self, you might say. In fact, I've had somebody like that as a guest on this podcast, and he might be returning as sort of a co host for an occasional weekly segment that I'm going to do. We'll see about that. He's had he's had a bout of bronchitis, I believe, so that's what's prevented him from being my co-host so far. But you know, we'll probably convene and record some episodes in the future, and you know, we'll see how that goes. But what one of the most kick-ass parts of Mark Twain that I don't want to completely overlook here are his critiques of imperialism. Regarding that, Twain wrote, I bring you the stately matron named Christendom, returning bedraggled, besmirched, and dishonored from pirate raids, with her soul full of meanness, her pockets full of boodle, and her mouth full of pious hypocrisies. Ooh, quite a way with words, you know? Quite a way with words. And, you know, it's a masterful indictment of hypocrisy. But how much would such a statement uh, be met with cheers and applause today in our fragmented and hyper reactive digital culture that doesn't allow you to criticize religion, the military, or all kinds of different things, you know. A lot of people are really sensitive about that stuff, and it's kind of funny because you know, I if we are in a free society, as these people so often claim, then to criticize the common institutions that surround us would would be way more common, and it actually wouldn't be as frowned upon. Now, I agree that sometimes there's a way of doing things that would resonate with more people, but at the same time, you might say it can be taking the coward's way out if you're always being conciliatory and never combative, you know. If you strongly disagree with something, you know, as Mark Twain did regarding imperialism, then, you know, you might as well just let it out there, let it all hang out, you know. Um, so I've got some closing thoughts here. The perpetual relevance of Twain's wit, you know, has touched on the importance of critical thinking, independent judgment, and the value of humor in navigating complex issues. Twain's words challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths while reminding us that dissent and reflection are vital for progress. So go ahead and tell me what you think about this. Are Twain's critiques still relevant? I would say absolutely. You know, what are you, stupid if you if you think they're not? Um, but you know, maybe that's me being too combative there. And how do we balance humor and seriousness in addressing societal issues? So share your thoughts with me. You can email me at wadewinio@gmail.com. And if you want, you could comment on this video if you find it on YouTube. You know, let me know your thoughts there. Or if you want to stalk me on social media, which I don't fully recommend, but if you want to do it, you can technically. And be nice, you know, be constructive. If you've got a critique or a comment or a question, go ahead and let me know. So until next time, keep questioning, keep reflecting, and as Twain might say, stop and think when you find yourself agreeing with everyone around you.